this, I'm not a legal expert, I assume is pretty rock solid evidence, and there was more evidence to back up her claims, and they said they're not going to use her. Did he give an explanation?
They couldn't be asked. They built a case around one girl, and if you're a police officer, you know, there are, and these, Amber and the girl they built the case around had actually fallen out. So the two of them were at loggerheads. So I could accept that they would run them as two separate trials. What I would never accept is that they cherry pick and, you know, the victim. And actually this goes to the heart of a great deal that goes on when we're talking about rape prosecutions, that a judgment is often made of the victim. You know, she was drunk, she's worn a short skirt, she was asking for it. That isn't what rape is. Rape is about consent. And here we had a child of 14 or 15 when the abuse was happening. She had come from a family where her brother had died. She'd actually found him dead. Her mum had a nervous breakdown. She'd pretty much brought up her little sister on her own. Her brother had been abused in the children's home where Cyril Smith was operating. She had had a life from hell. And yet, even after all that, she had put her trust in me because I had been assured by my supervisors, I had been headhunted to do that job with the direction of the head lawyer in the CPS. You don't get more powerful than that, do you? You know, if the head lawyer in the CPS and the assistant chief constable gives their word that if you tell us what's happened to you, we will prosecute your rapists. You believe that. I certainly did at that point. And yet here I was for the second time seeing the same thing happening. Now, I'm going to fill in the bits after that, but I think it's worth saying that I have been fighting for Amber and Ruby for 10 years now. And last April, after 10 years, I took those two children, who were no longer children, plus another victim, to meet the new Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police. He apologised to them. He gave all of them a letter of apology. And to Amber, he gave an apology and an assurance that all her rapes have now been crimed, that she is recognised as a victim. And yet, when she was dropped from that job in 2012, just before the trial, the barrister realised that without her evidence, they could not run that trial because her evidence was central to the case. So she was no longer a victim or a witness, and it was too late to bring her on board for that. The only other way of introducing her evidence into a court of law was if she was an offender. So they secretly added her to the indictment as one of the gang of abusers. She did not know. She did not have any, she was not arrested. She was not cautioned. She had no legal representation. She didn't know until 2 years later when I resigned from the police and went and told her what had been said about her in court. And as a result of what was said about her in court, social services were trying to take her children away from her by saying she was a paedophile. Now, you're looking shocked. I am still shocked to this day that that is possible in the UK. Because if you can be accused of being a murderer or a paedophile and you are not made aware, you are not given an opportunity to defend yourself, that for me goes against every single thing that I believed happened. But that I swear on my children's life that that is exactly what has happened in this case. And I am trying to raise awareness that this goes on in the UK today. And furthermore, the CPS still are saying that they were justified in making that decision and that they would do it again if it was convenient.
What?
Yep, they will still not acknowledge that that was wrong. And I am fighting still because to me, it goes against everything. Even the Yorkshire Ripper is entitled to a defence. This young girl was secretly described as a paedophile. She is not. She was a victim of a grooming gang. And So this injustice still drives me forward because these are the cases that I do know. That's why the foundation is so important, because victims and survivors come to us today telling us of current failures, of current injustices, and we fight for them within the system. So it's still a massive problem, but it shocked me, and it still shocks me. And actually, it makes me feel, I think I was exploited as well, if I'm honest. You know, I joined the police to do good, and yet they are the worst things that I have ever seen anybody do to a vulnerable person. And that was done with the full knowledge and backing and authority of chief constables and the CPS, and that's kind of what keeps me going, really.
Maggie, we've talked about the cases, which are obviously awful, and that case is so unbelievably shocking. I couldn't even say miscarriage. I don't even have the words to describe what they did to that poor woman. It's awful. But if we look at the big picture, do we know roughly how many girls were abused, how many girls were raped, how many men were involved? Do we have any of those types of figures?
No, because the authorities always refuse to gather the statistics around these kinds of cases. And I believe that's because they never wanted to gather them. You know, when you see reports, they always report that abuse in the family is far greater than this kind of abuse. And I actually wouldn't disagree with that. But for me, it's not, it's not the charts. It's not about the best and the worst. Every one of those victims is a child, and they all deserve equal support and justice. But I always say that, knowledge is power. And before we can ever change anything, we have to know what it is we want to change. And I am not in any way, shape or form racist, but this problem, we need to understand why. We need to understand why and where and how, and then work out how we are going to resolve it. Because there are a lot of good Muslims, there are a lot of people in that community, a lot of women that, I have dealt with in the course of my job who have also been abused, who are also subjected to forced marriages and honour killings. And, it isn't about making decisions, it's about seeking the truth and then finding a solution. So I'm talking about something that needs a solution. And unless we're prepared to talk about it and explore how we resolve it, we're never going to change it.
Maggie, it's interesting that you felt you had to put in the disclaimer saying how you're not racist. I think everybody would know that anyway. But I think it speaks to something that's important to say in this context, which is, and I was saying this to you in the car on the way here, which was that when we first had a survivor of one of these grooming gangs on the show, there was a distinct feeling of like all around us suddenly, we were two comedians back then operating in a very kind of progressive comedy industry. And suddenly there was this feeling of almost like we'd done something wrong. And I imagine you encountered this as well. And the thing that I find odd about it is I think you'd want to know that if this was happening irrespective of the races of the people involved or any of that. But yet that seems to me, based on what you're saying about 7/7 and all the rest of it, it was almost like the fact that there was a racial dimension to this made it much harder to talk about and to investigate and to prosecute. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
I do think that is one of the dynamics, very much so. I think that there's a racial dynamic there. I also actually think there's a class dynamic, if I'm honest. Poor working class children, they come from a shit estate, they're out at 10, 12 o'clock at night. I'd argue they need more protection, not less. And as I said before, if it was Boris Johnson's daughter, it wouldn't happen. The police would be down them like a ton of bricks. We find that the media absolutely focuses the minds of the authorities on taking action. And the recent case in Manchester where 3 women have been horrendously treated in police custody and strip searched, we went to the media after trying for 2 years to get the police to take it seriously. We've now got an independent review looking at it. So yes, the racial dynamics are part of it. I think it's important to say, though, that when I walked off OpSpan, that was in the summer of 2011. And I thought I was losing my marbles, if I'm honest. I still can't believe, I still can't believe that it was left to me to highlight this subject, because it was going on all through the north of England. Yorkshire, Rochdale, Oldham, Huddersfield. You look at a northern town, and this was happening. And there were all those police officers and social workers, and yet we weren't talking about it. So I sat at home for probably about 2 months, actually, thinking, I can't believe what I'm seeing. Am I wrong? Yeah, am I missing something here? And then, what happened? It was at exactly the time that the Hillsborough families were fighting for justice for their families. And I sat at home on my own, watching the telly and seeing these, mums and dads who had grown old fighting for the truth, really. And then I had a conversation with my boss on the phone, and I kind of unburdened my heart. And I didn't think that she was a bad person. I just felt that she was being twirled and she wasn't strong enough to stand a corner. But when she admitted to me that she agreed with what I was saying, that I was right, but that I should remember that senior officers made decisions. I was just a detective, and my job was to do as I was told. And if I couldn't do that, maybe I was in the wrong job. And that's what she said. And my loyalty then to her and to any colleagues really went on a back burner, because my duty was to those children. But as well as that, with Hillsborough going on, I've got 4 kids. And I truly believed that this would come out at some point. And actually, it still upsets me to think of what I've lost to tell the truth, because I was just telling the truth. But I didn't want my kids turning the TV on in 30 years' time when I'm, pushing up daisies. And suddenly, Rochdale and Augusta is all over the news, and all these children that have been failed for decades. I wanted my kids to know that I had tried my best. So on that day, I just decided that I was going to tell the truth. And at that point, I was really naive, because I thought it was down to one lazy colleague. That is the God's honest truth. We had a guy running that job. He was a traffic man. He'd never worked with kids. He's a man who said to me, I will never name him, I never have, when I was fighting for these kids and I had a conversation with him, getting upset that they weren't going to prosecute these men for raping another child, he said to me, Maggie, calm down. He said, what are these kids ever going to contribute to society? They should have been drowned at birth. And I swear that is what he said to me. So when I had the conversation with the boss and I'm watching Hillsborough, I thought, you know what? I am going to tell the truth. But at that point, I didn't believe that the chief constable even knew what was going on. I thought this was just that job. So I went back to work, and the first person I went to see was the head of the public protection unit. And she listened to me, seemed to be shocked, said she would do something about it. And then I left it with her. And a couple of weeks later, every day, I'm not sleeping, I can't eat, I can't sleep. It's just constantly in my mind. a couple of weeks later, I get an email from her saying, "Oh, hi Maggie, really sorry I've not done anything about this, but I'm going on holiday in a couple of days, but I'm going to delegate it to such and such a body." Well, that was the first person that I'd spoken to about this when I was first concerned, and I thought, I am going to deal with this. So I wrote to the Chief Constable. I wrote him a long email. I put everything on paper. His response was to send me a 4-line email back saying, "Thank you for your interest. If lessons have to be learned, we will learn them, but thank you for your time." And I thought, you know what? You can fuck off, because I am not leaving it here. So I went to the Federation and I said, no, I'd tell a lie. He put me in touch with another person because I refused to speak to the first person that he suggested. So I spoke to the head of serious crime. He condescended to allow me 15 minutes of his time. He didn't want to hear a word I said. And he finished off by saying to me with a finger, "Listen, Maggie," because I told him that I am not leaving this here. I am going to take this further. I want something doing about it, and I am not walking away again. And before I left the room, he said to me, "You know, some of the things you said to me today caused me serious concern, but you be very careful what you do. You've, signed a kind of a secrecy agreement when you joined the police. Anything you only know because of your role as a police officer." And you said a few other things, and the fear that left me with was that I would possibly go to prison if I spoke out. So I thought, I need some legal advice. So I went to my federation, who introduced me to a lawyer. I saw the lawyer, explained what had gone on, and they said, "We need all your evidence." And I did have evidence this time. I didn't on Augusta, but this time I did. So I went back to the federation, told them what the lawyer had said, and at that point they said, "Really sorry, but we can't pay for you to go back to that lawyer. But tell you what, give us all your information. We'll give it to the forced solicitors." And I said, "You are having a fucking laugh. I have already tried to get something done about this. I've been right to the top of GMP. No, I'm going somewhere independent." They wouldn't pay for me. So what actually happened was I was in a mess, and I ended up unconscious on the floor at work. My colleagues took me to my doctor, who signed me off, and with severe work-related stress. I was really ill, but I decided that I was going to go public. Wherever that led, I was going to speak out. So I resigned. I went back to see the kids that I felt I'd failed, told them what had happened. Do you know that Amber didn't even know at that point that she had been added onto that indictment in the trial a year before? She wasn't even aware. But when I told her, she said, "Oh my God," because I was forbidden from speaking to these kids. Now I know why they tried to take my kids, because it all makes sense. So those kids are like my own kids now. But I fought for her to keep her kids, and she did. But I decided I was going to go public. So I actually approached Panorama. They put me in touch with File on 4 because the Jimmy Savile thing was just all blowing up. And I worked for 3 months on telling the basics of the story to File on 4, which is on the website for the foundation. It was about Rochdale, but the girls themselves also told a bit of their story. And then the drama team behind 3 Girls approached me, and with the consent of the girls, I worked on that programme for 4 years, and that's what educated the country. And once I started to speak out, I think that's probably, when I first went public, the Chief Constable went on all the programmes, Woman's Hour, and he was given a right of reply, the Today programme, and I went on all those programmes. He went on there, and what he basically said was that I was a woman who had become too emotionally involved, that I was bereaved. Basically, I'd lost the fucking plot, and I had, because of what they'd done, but I didn't. I was driven by what was right. And really now, the ordinary people have been my salvation, because I'm saying nothing different than ordinary people believe. The problem is at the top of these organisations. They are corrupt.
Hey KK, do you like trigonometry?
Of course I do. Incredible interviews, fascinating guests, phenomenal live shows, and hilarious raw streams.
In that case, you need to join our locals, so you can have access to even more brilliant content.
That's right. You get the chance to win incredible prizes, ask our phenomenal guests your questions, access extra content, and now the only place to watch our Raws on Catch Up is on Locals.
Our Raw shows still go out at 7 p.m. UK time, 2 p.m. Eastern as normal. But if you want to watch them after this time, then you're going to need to sign up to our locals.
Raws have now become too spicy to stay on YouTube, so they're only available to watch back on our Locals page.
All you need to do to sign up is click on the link below this video, and for just $7 a month, you have access to all of this brilliant content.
$7 a month, even for someone of my persuasion, that's a bargain. See you all on Locals. So we talked about the racial concern, which is understandable. People are very sensitive about that issue, but it sounds like it was, in addition to that, there was just a lot of incompetence or lack of interest, or they didn't care, or it was just a job to them. Or is that it? Or when you say corrupt, what do you mean?
I don't think it's the individual police officers.
Okay.
I think it's the powers that be at the top. These crimes...
Sorry, Maggie, what do you mean by the powers that be? Because...
I mean the chief constable. I mean the
And why
Home
don't they
Office.
care about this?
But and just also as well, when you say chief constable, it'll probably help people to understand who the chief constable is, what they're in charge of, etc. Do you see what I mean? Like, so we can paint this picture.
Every police force has a big boss.
Right.
And the big boss is the chief constable.
Right. Got you.
So the Met, it's, what's his name, Rowley.
Oh,
The commissioner.
Yeah.
In the Met, they call him the commissioner. But every other police force in the country, they don't have a commissioner, they have a chief constable.
Right. Okay.
And they are in charge, and around them, they have what is called a gold command group. And they are assistant chief constables, head of crime, and they are called a gold command group. And they choose where the resources for that police force go. So they have to prioritise how they spend their money. And this kind of crime was not a priority. So, for instance, if you go back to Augusta in 2004 and 5, the reason I say they're all connected, because in 2004 and 5, the Home Office were paying police forces additional money for good responses and outcomes in what is called acquisitive crime. So a burglary, a robbery, a theft from a motor vehicle. If you rang up and your car was being broken into, because I was in the cops then, you would go like blues and twos and you'd be there in 30 seconds. If you reported a rape, you were the back of the queue, because the police, it was not a priority. So they were called performance indicators, and that's what you were measuring. So in a police force like GMP, if your performance indicator showed that you were solving all the burglaries or the robberies, then your funding from the Home Office would be far higher. But if you dealt with these child rapes instead of the burglaries, then you wouldn't be meeting your targets. And actually, today or this week, the Suella Braverman has announced that police forces have been directed that they must attend every burglary, every robbery, haven't they? That's just been in the news this week. That will drive what police forces on the ground do. So chief constables now are not independent. They are political pawns, and the government, they're not operating independent of politics anymore. So the priorities are set by the top, by the Home Office. And that reflects on how a child who is raped is treated by the system.
So what you're saying is, because of the...
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes complete sense.
I'm just trying to convert it into an easy to understand way of saying it. So the fact that the police respond to politically driven incentives and that political message creates perverse incentives on the ground, and therefore a chief constable who's trying to meet the political needs of the day, they're going to direct resources at things that are being prioritized by the government. And let's say, I mean, it's obviously the case that burglaries affect more people than child sexual exploitation. So from an electoral point of view, a government would be like, well, you know, people care about burglaries, let's focus our resources on this. And then the resources don't get allocated to these cases. But that still doesn't explain why you had the situation as you did with Augusta, where the investigation started, but it's not started to actually get to the bottom of what's going on. It started as a way of deflecting attention from failings and is then immediately shut down. So that sounds to me like people covering their asses.
I think it's a PR exercise.
Right.
It's public relations.
But that's what I mean. That's what covering your asses is, right?
Yeah. Yes, it is.
Right.
Yeah,
so you're
very
trying
much
to protect yourself from bad publicity.
Yeah.
Which is interesting to me because, look, I understand all organizations have concerns about how they appear because it reflects badly on the people who run them. But policing is different for the very reason that you said, which is it's about protecting people.
But that's where I was naive.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, people might think I'm a bit of a conspiracy theorist now, but I'm really not. And, you know, if you think of the Lucy Letby case, right?
This is a nurse who killed children.
A nurse who killed lots of children, where the organisation, the trustees in the NHS were more interested in protecting the reputation of their institution than they were in saving children's lives from a potentially murdering nurse. And this inquiry will show that. What I'm saying is that from the journey of my last 10 years, that is exactly what I see in the police. That there is no independent complaints procedure. It's not independent.
Because there's the IPCC, isn't there? The Independent Police Complaints.
They are not, you know, they are not independent. I mean, on Augusta, right, they're about as much use as a chocolate fire guard. On Augusta, that job was deliberately, the official inquiry reported that job closed down because GMP were not prepared to put resources in. That is the official finding. 5 senior officers were then referred to the IOPC for investigation. All 5 of those officers refused to be interviewed. The IOPC has got no power to force them to be interviewed. Those officers have all retired with a big fat pension, but they are responsible for allowing 100 paedophiles to walk the streets for 15 years. For me, they should be held accountable. They are guilty of misconduct in a public office, and yet there will not be accountability because they have walked into the sunset free of any kind of consequences. So I see these, that the Internal Police Complaints Department, the IOPC, they are delaying tactics. They are all there to actually protect the organisation. What I would say is that what's happened this week in relation to police forces being told they must investigate burglaries, that is another public relations exercise because we have got a general election coming up. The public in this country are disillusioned with the police.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Everybody knows that if you report a burglary or a car crime or a robbery, you will get a crime number.
That's all you get?
That's all you get.
So this direction from the government is telling police forces what to do. They're not getting any more resources. So once again, we're in the land of PIs, maybe not called PIs, but it's the same land. They're not putting any more police officers in. So if police officers now who are there are not enough, they are not trained effectively, they are too young, they're inexperienced, experienced ones are running away in their droves. If you are not going to address those problems, the government can tell them to do it, and okay, they might do it because the chief constables will be directed by the Home Office to do that. But the consequences of doing all the burglaries and the thefts and the robberies are that the child rapes and the, perhaps the gun crime won't get dealt with. It's about prioritising where you want your resources to go. And presenting the policing to the public is very much a PR exercise.
Yeah.
They have very powerful public relations departments. Local police, local TV stations and local newspapers will only report what they are given permission to report, because otherwise they're excluded from press conferences where they're going to get a scoop. I know all this because I have lived it for 10 years. So I don't waste my breath fighting for things that are outside of my control. What I waste my breath doing is trying to raise awareness and educate the country, because I am a big believer in people power. Progress is far too slow. I would change it today. But from where I started 10 years ago, nobody knew about grooming gangs. If there's one thing that I have done, it's definitely raise awareness. The drama, we won 6 BAFTAs, and I've not watched it since I showed the girls because it triggers me. I can't look at certain things because it doesn't go far enough, but what it did, it educated the whole country that this problem existed. I'm too close into my story and their story. But what I can see now is the bigger picture and the foundation. I started my own charity because I was falling apart, because there are so many desperate people. So the Maggie Oliver Foundation, we don't get any public funding. I don't want it because I want to be an independent voice. I don't want principles and truth to be mixed up with people who are paying our bills. And the bills are actually staff. We've now got 7 members of staff. I've got 25 volunteers. We offer ongoing support for emotional support to people who need someone to talk to. But we also fight for victims who are trapped in a system now which is doing nothing. So I'm disillusioned with the system. It needs to change. I'm trying to change it by sharing current information of what I've learned. The changes will come from other people, though, people in power. And the way things have been, I have very little faith that they will do it willingly. It's public pressure that will lead to change. We have moved forward a little bit in the recent cases. Abusers, like the man who got Ruby pregnant, are being charged with rape. That's progress. The sentences are quite often longer. I mean, the way I look at it, if I hadn't started speaking out, would we be in this place? I don't know, but that kind of makes me feel I've done something worthwhile. But the consequences for me personally were horrific. I loved my job, my career. I gave up my career. I lost my home that I'd been in for 30 years. I lost my income. I lost my mental health. I spent, probably 5 years in a place where I could think of nothing else. And I look back over the past 10 years and a lot of the good things, the fun things in my life have been squeezed into a tiny corner of it. I've got my kids and my family, and I want my life back. But I can't allow these victims and survivors to go on alone, which is why I started my charity, to build an army of people like me who will carry on my work, and we're growing it in the spirit in which I started it. And I have got an amazing team. So anybody listening who wants to look at the website or do a fundraiser or donate, we are funded entirely from public funding. And that's, we've helped over, I think it's nearly 4,000 people now since I started in 2019. That's a lot of victims and a lot of survivors, but the authorities are not there. There isn't enough mental health services or support services. We, as a country, we are in a mess.
We are
in a mess. And I've picked my corner because I've got knowledge there that's taken me a long time to gain. And if I walk away, that learning goes with me. So I'm trying to make sure that it will carry on long after I'm here. there's a lot of battles to be fought, I think, in this country. This is mine because I'm an expert now. I know this subject inside out, and I still care, and it still matters, and there's still not enough being done. But, you know, we're not going anywhere, and I'm not going to give the authorities an easy ride. And I think I said to you before, I always say I have pissed a lot of people off. But the people I've pissed off deserved it.
Yeah.
You know, if they were doing the job, I wouldn't be able to say this about them. So if they pull the fingers out and do the job they are meant to do, they are public servants. The police are there to serve the public, and they are not doing that. They are failing monumentally. We don't really have a criminal justice system that is fit for purpose. In these cases alone, there's less than 2% of reported rapes that ever reach a trial. Reported rapes. That's not the ones that are not reported, because many victims will never report it because they know what they'll face. So rape and child abuse has become virtually decriminalised. And for me, that is not something to be proud of. We are meant to be a civilised country. We are not a third world country. And while we're, you know, calling other countries for, you know, lack of human rights and inhumane treatment of prisoners, we need to be putting the things right in our own backyard, and there's a long way to go. So I know I go on, but it matters to me.
It's worth going on about. Maggie, let's move on to locals maybe, because we're running out of time. So we're going to continue the conversation on with questions from our supporters, and there's a couple of questions I want to ask you about, particularly about, you know, one of the things we've seen, you talked about disillusionment with the police. Mm-hmm. One of the things people see is people now being arrested for saying things and not being arrested for doing things, which is quite odd, but we'll talk about that. Before we do, though, we always end this part of the interview with the same question, which is, what's the one thing that we're not talking about that we really should be? You looked at your book there, and I agree, your book and the subject of everything you're talking about, but if you want to raise something else as well, please do.
God, where do you start that we're not talking about? Oof. I don't know. For me, I think the biggie is accountability at the top. Mm. I think if we had that, we would see a lot of changes. I think people at the top of society are often protected. I mean, I don't want to just narrow it down to my subject, but I do believe if one chief constable was charged with misconduct in a public office, that would revolutionise the way that policing works, because they would look at their own, every one of them would look at their own pension, their own future, and they wouldn't want to be sitting in a court of law. That has never happened. I would like to see that happen. So I think accountability is probably the word.
Maggie, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me on.
If people